The potential of any major U.S.-Iran talks appears to be diminishing. Just yesterday, both Iran's president and President Trump signaled they were willing to meet each other. They expressed the need to ease tensions and negotiate a new nuclear deal. But now Iran is demanding Washington lift sanctions first before any meetings can be held. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News State Department and Foreign Affairs reporter Christina Ruffini. She's joining us from Washington. Christina, what prompted this switch?
He's not necessarily walking it back so much as he's throwing cold water on the idea, which was really pushed by the French and President Macron. The French, along with the Germans and the UK and the rest of the EU, are struggling to save the Iran nuclear agreement, aka the JCPOA, which the U.S. pulled out of last year. The only reason Iran was willing to come to the table then and enter the agreement was because it loosened sanctions and injected some money into its struggling economy. Now that the U.S. has reimposed those sanctions and is threatening everyone from international banks to the sailors who might crew Iranian oil ships, that they could be next if they go help Tehran, it's getting harder and harder for Iran to justify staying in the accord.
So why not sit down and talk to the United States?
Look, the U.S. maximum pressure campaign is having an impact on Iran's economy. It's really starting to struggle, but the results of that so far hasn't been to get Iran back to the table. It's actually emboldened the hardliners who say, look, this is why you can't trust America. They're never going to do right by us. Let's link arms and stick it to Uncle Sam. Like President Trump, President Rouhani has to think about local politics, right? All politics are local, even in Tehran. And he can't say to those hardliners, yes, the U.S. went back on their deal, and now we're going to give them more things to get them to come agree to the promises they made in the first place. That position would be completely untenable for him, for his domestic audience.
Now, both President Trump and President Rouhani are set to attend the UN General Assembly up here in New York next month. Is there any chance something can be done that we would see the two sit down?
This is what the French were really trying to work out. They wanted the U.S. to give some sort of financial relief, and that's what President Trump kind of referenced in his press conference yesterday. He said it wouldn't be cash, but maybe the U.S. could free up some credit or maybe allow Iran some waivers to sell Iranian crude somewhere that had previously banned. India comes to mind. There has to be some sort of visible give, the French say, from the U.S. in order to allow the Iranians enough face-saving measures to start negotiating. But both sides have really dug in, and as one foreign diplomatic source told me, U.S. maximum pressure has created Iranian maximum resistance.
Switching gears a bit to Afghanistan, President Trump has talked at length about wanting to be out of Afghanistan. He's been critical of the U.S. for staying in its longest war, 10 months of negotiations, and it appears that we may be close to seeing a deal between the U.S. and the Taliban. Is that right?
We think so. U.S. negotiator Zalmay Khalilzad is hoping to have an agreement by the weekend. Now, we've heard that before, and these negotiations are very tricky, but I checked in with sources this morning, and they told me things are on track, although nothing has been agreed to yet. One thing to keep in mind, these talks are only between the U.S. and the Taliban. They do not involve the people actually running the country in Kabul, the democratically elected government of President Ashraf Ghani. So even if they get this landmark deal, that's great, but they've got to start all over again with the inter-Afghan dialogue. And as hard as this process was, that process is expected to be much more difficult.
And part of the reason, I imagine, for the difficulty is the concept of withdrawing U.S. troops and the coalition there. That's raising fears that it would give rise to the Taliban, ISIS, al-Qaeda, give other terror groups potentially a safe ground where they could launch attacks. What are the risks here in derailing this process?
I mean, what you mentioned is a real concern. The Taliban currently holds more territory in Afghanistan than it has at any point since the war began. In that 18 years, we've seen some old familiars like al-Qaeda continue to operate from that territory. And now we've got new players like ISIS. You know, ISIS claimed responsibility for that horrible suicide bombing in Kabul last week that killed 63 people at a wedding. There's also this fear that if the Taliban, and to a lesser extent al-Qaeda, are seen to have become more moderate, partially due to their negotiations with the U.S., their followers could be directed to the more extreme groups like ISIS. So basically, they could defect from al-Qaeda and go join ISIS, strengthening it in Afghanistan. U.S. officials were asked if ISIS in Afghanistan was a threat to the U.S., and they said yes, any ISIS affiliate could be a threat to America. So after 18 years of conflict, a conflict that started to go after a terrorist group that attacked the U.S., the U.S. could leave Afghanistan with a new and equally dangerous extremist affiliate ready to take its place.
Thank you, Christina.